Good afternoon. Welcome back to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be today's host. We have again with us Dan Drew, currently the mayor of Middletown, who's a candidate for governor in the state of Connecticut in 2018. Dan, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here with you.
Let's talk about single payer, because that's big in the news right now. Well, there's two terms that I'm hearing, and perhaps you can compare and contrast how they compare to each other. You have single payer and you have Medicare for all. And first of all, compare and contrast them and tell us which one fits your vision for Connecticut better.
I think there are really two different ways of saying the same thing, which is that we believe that everybody should have health care coverage, that health care coverage should be universal, and that a system like Medicare can keep costs down and can spur entrepreneurship while guaranteeing that everyone has safe, affordable, consistent access to health care. If you're not healthy, you have nothing. And if you have people throughout society that get sick and go bankrupt because of it, then society writ large is harmed. So for us all to do well, we have to ensure that we have a society that's healthy and that's productive. It's an economic issue and it's a moral issue. We have to make sure that we take care of each other. And a single payer or Medicare for all healthcare system is the only real effective way to do it.
Does that follow the same pattern as we fairly recently in Connecticut passed paid sick leave days, where, and I think 3 is the national average for people, the number of days that they're sick in the course of a year, and we guaranteed employees in Connecticut that number of sick leave days off. So that, for instance, if you work in a restaurant, when you're sick, you don't go and handle food and give it to people, and one person being sick can get 100 people sick out of that. And likewise in a hospital, a nursing home facility, and other places where there's a lot of hand-on contact between either hosts or food servers or kitchen staff or healthcare providers. Isn't that similar to what we're talking about here? I
think it comes from the same place in the head and in the heart, which is that we have a responsibility to take care of one another. You know, I said once before, and I've said it a lot of other times on previous occasions, in this country and in this state right now, we have socialism for the rich and socialism for corporations. We socialize costs for the most elite people out there. We have gigantic tax subsidies for corporations, we do giveaways directly to corporations, and we underwrite the wealthy in the tax code directly. Meanwhile, the rest of us are the ones paying for all of this. It's backwards. We're doing it the wrong way. Instead, we need to be sure that we're taking care of the greatest number of people out there so that they can be productive and they can live their lives. That's going to make all of us do better, the wealthy included. Everyone does better that way. And that's the approach I think we need to take.
Well, you mentioned trickle-down economics in the first show, and that, of course, came into play during the Reagan administration, during the 80s. And a guy by the name of George Herbert Walker Bush very aptly characterized trickle-down economics as voodoo economics, because it doesn't, in fact, create, and the wealthy do not take that money. It never trickles down. In fact, it ends up, you have the work of our individuals, and the economics, the good that they produce, trickles upward rather than trickle downward.
Correct. And Mario Cuomo, who was one of my favorites and was my governor when I was a little kid, was giving a lecture at the 92nd Street Y in New York City a few years ago, and he was actually telling this exact story about how trickle-down economics came into play and how George Herbert Walker Bush called it voodoo economics. But then he married the witch doctor.
Yeah, he did. He ended up being vice president.
And he ended up being vice president of the United States. And, Cuomo made another great point, which, because the whole idea behind trickle-down economics, it's really ridiculous. It's that if you cut taxes for the wealthy, they get so excited by having extra money that they go and invest that money, and that makes the economy crank, and then suddenly the money just, trickles down to everybody else, which is, of course, not what happens. They just hoard the money that they get.
Yeah, they save it rather than spend it.
And they save it, and it doesn't come to anybody else. So it's counterintuitive. Why would we all do better if we concentrate most of our resources in the hands of just a handful of people? It doesn't make any sense at all. And Cuomo, I remember, famously said one time, and I always laugh when I heard this, if that's the case, why don't you cut the tax rate to 0 and then we'll all be millionaires. It makes no sense. It's mathematically ludicrous.
Yep.
And it's the only idea that's persisted for so long in such blatant disregard of any fact or any experience that we've had. And I think it's high time that we just acknowledge that it's a failure, it doesn't work, and until we embrace the fact that we need to make sure that all of us are doing well, we're not going to get better. It's only when we embrace the idea that everyone needs to do better that we're going to actually start to do better.
And when folks that I guess we refer to them as middle class or middle income Americans, when they get a raise in their paycheck, they go out and they spend that money, which benefits everyone, because the quicker the money moves economically, the more good it does, and the more of it actually ends up stimulating upward.
Correct.
To the wealthiest.
The wealthy would do much better under that situation too, because they have more of it to begin with. So when it's doing better for everyone, they're naturally going to do better. This is why the earned income tax credit is so important. And not only shouldn't be gotten rid of, it should be strengthened, because the earned income tax credit gets a lot of money circulating back through the economy again and helps families in the lower end of the income spectrum do very well. Incidentally, and this is one of the great ironies when you hear Republicans who lionize conservative philosophy deriding the earned income tax credit. Who created it? Who was the first creator of the earned income tax credit?
It sounds like something out of the Jack Kemp era.
It was Ronald Reagan.
Okay, so the Jack Kemp era.
Yeah.
Then, yeah.
Ronald Reagan created the first earned income tax credit. The poster child for conservative economics realized the value of ensuring that money got back into the economy. Somehow the idea of trickle-down economics mutated, and it's gotten us to where we are today, which is a position of failure, and we need to reverse course.
It really is interesting to look at the fact that this, I guess a lot of folks call him Saint Ronaldus, because they lionize him much beyond what he was in life, and yet he fails. I think it's 6 out of the 10 main points for today's Republican Party. He fails.
Easy. Yep.
Yeah, he's just, they lionize him as a person and yet have completely lost track of what he actually believed in and what he actually worked on.
Yeah, he's famous for cutting taxes once or twice, and then what people forget is because the deficit exploded under Reagan.
It did.
And because we had a massive recession under Reagan, because trickle-down economics doesn't work, Reagan was forced to raise income taxes on the rich, I think 5 or 6 times over the course of his presidency, which is part of what got the economy moving again. And even Reagan recognized that I don't think he ever stopped and said trickle-down is a failure. He always stood by the idea, but his actions spoke much louder after the mistakes of those early tax cuts for the wealthy were realized.
And then, of course, cost George Herbert Walker Bush mightily when he mouthed those famous words, "Read my lips, no new taxes," because, as you say, his tax increase was the last straw to a lot of wealthy people, and they used it against him to not support him in his continuation in office. Middletown. We talked a little bit about Middletown in last night's show, but I think it bears repeating what accomplishments you've made in you've had three terms in office now. What accomplishments you made generically, and then specifically what you've done to bring additional business into Middletown, not just small businesses, but also Federal Express has a big office, a big facility that they're building there. What about Middletown? What makes Middletown successful where a lot of other parts of Connecticut haven't been? And how can those parts of Connecticut be successful if they follow the policies of Middletown?
So what we do is whenever I make a decision, I think about what's going to be good for the greatest number of people in Middletown as possible. And if something is really good for the greatest number of people, we do it. And if it's not, we don't, which is a pretty simple guiding philosophy that's always steered us in the right direction. Middletown, on the day I took office, had an unemployment rate close to double what it is today, had violent crime 18% higher than it is now, had less infrastructure. Our bond rating was only AA. Today, our unemployment rate is cut nearly in half. Violent crime is down 18%. We've had hundreds of new small businesses open. Our bond rating went from AA to AA plus to AAA. We've had the 3 lowest interest rates in the city's history. We budget to a surplus every year. We are investing in our parks, in our road infrastructure, in our sewer systems. We're building a world-class riverfront. We have market rate housing going in downtown. We have a mini tech boom in our downtown. We have Federal Express, as you mentioned, building a Northeast Regional Distribution Center in Middletown. And we didn't get them by tossing gigantic amounts of corporate welfare at them. We didn't do it by giving them $100, or $20 million loan and saying this is forgivable if you create X number of jobs. What we did was we made sure the process of coming into Middletown was as quick and as smooth as possible. And this is how we've been so successful in reducing unemployment. That company is going to have more than 1,000 jobs by the time the building is up and running and fully mature. We promised them a 3-month turnaround for their approvals. My staff worked with them on the front end. We had them approved in 3 months. We did a roundtable of their application so that everything that was wrong with their application was corrected before the day they filed it. We worked closely with them. We made the process easy. We made the process smooth. I made our building inspectors available to them regularly. And we're in a position now where they're spending $250 million building this Northeast Regional Distribution Center in our community. We were competing against Massachusetts and Rhode Island to get it and won. And the building is going in on the site of a former 1 million square foot Aetna office complex.
Oh, isn't that ironic?
And I think it's illustrative because the company that just bolted out of Connecticut, we replaced with a different company by taking a completely different tack and doing it the right way. And not only is FedEx putting 1,000 jobs in this area, but they're using Connecticut union construction workers to build it, which is something we're very proud of, because that money that the company's spending, that $250 million, is getting reinvested back in our community and in our region. So
the workers that are getting paid fair market wages will turn around and spend that money locally, and which generates more good for Middletown.
Correct. Those men and women building that project are either from Middletown or from the central Connecticut region, which means when they leave work and cash their paychecks, they're going to put their children into guitar lessons at the local music store. They are going to go to a local coffee shop in the morning for a bagel and a cup of coffee. They're going to go to downtown restaurants when they go out to dinner at night with their spouses. And that's going to be true in every community that they live in. And it's particularly valuable for our community because while some of these workers may not necessarily live in Middletown, all of them are driving into it every single day. And they're spending some of their money there. And so it's making our community more prosperous.
Yeah, as you mentioned, many of them are bringing their children into Middletown for their daycare experience.
Correct.
You mentioned market rate housing. Explain that a little bit more.
So our downtown never before has had housing that's available at market rates to have people with disposable income who make good living wage jobs within walking distance of all of the amenities we have downtown. There's an apartment complex going in right now, close to 100 units. It's not done yet, but it's under construction. That's all going to be market rate housing. These are going to be empty nesters and young professionals, all of whom are now just going to live downtown and spend their money largely downtown, which is going to compound the vibrancy that we already have going on. And now we have other developers that are interested in building market rate housing downtown because they see what's happening with the building that's under construction today.
So you've acted in a very efficient and very, not just judicious, but a very efficient way in getting all these processes completed in a very short length of time with a lot of help from City Hall to help Federal Express get all these things in place. And I'm sure that, one of the big knocks against local, state, and federal government is that it's not efficient. So in fact, you overcame that impression that people have of government not being able to be efficient and judicious, and by doing exactly that.
Yeah, this is another feature, I think, of the trickle-down economics message that we've had in this country for the last 40 years. There's this notion that government does nothing well and that the market does everything perfectly, and that's not always true. There are things government doesn't do well, I'll concede that, and there are things government does very well. And the simple fact of the matter is, when it's run well, and for the right reasons, it functions well. It's there to protect us, and it's there to ensure that certain things happen. if it's operating properly, then it can facilitate this kind of growth and this kind of prosperity for everybody. And that's the important thing, is to figure out how to make it work properly. What you want are all the regulations you need, and no more than what you need. But you should have what you need to protect your people and to make sure that you can be prosperous. That's what we've done in Middletown.
Federal prisons are a pretty good example of how the corporate world does not serve us well, does not serve us in a better fashion than our government does. But healthcare, compare the system we have now with HMOs to Medicare.
Yeah, all you have to do is look at privately held, for-profit health insurance and compare the breakdown of every dollar spent to the way every dollar is spent in Medicare. 98 cents out of every dollar that's paid into the Medicare system is spent directly on care. 2 of those cents are spent on administrative costs and overhead. Think about that. 98 cents out of every dollar is going into care.
That's a little bit better than the for-profit HMO system, isn't it?
There are about 70 cents out of every dollar that's going into care. The other 30 cents are being spent on lobbying and executive compensation. Think about that for a second. You have CEOs of these companies that on your health are making tens of millions of dollars per year. And it's not like there's just one of them at these companies. There are hundreds, if not thousands of them. So the costs are enormous, and the system is wildly inefficient right now. And one of the reasons, when we talk about healthcare, we always talk about the cost of insurance. And that's a huge mistake, because that takes for granted that the insurance model that we're working on right now makes sense. And I don't think it does entirely. And it's not the way to make sure that our healthcare system is running as inexpensively and as efficiently as possible. Now, you talk to a lot of physicians, and they want a single-payer healthcare system, because one of the things they do right now, getting back to the idea that the market doesn't do everything perfectly, doctors have to spend a huge portion of their time every single day on the phone with insurance company bureaucrats who are not medical professionals, arguing about what treatments their patients need and getting those treatments approved, which makes the cost of delivering the healthcare in the first place vastly more expensive than it has to be. Even if the doctors were on the phone with another doctor at the insurance company, they haven't seen you, they haven't evaluated you. So one of the things a single-payer healthcare system does is it makes the cost of running healthcare and delivering healthcare less expensive, and ensures that your doctor, in consultation with you, are making the decisions about what your care should be, rather than a bureaucrat whose job it is to make sure the insurance company is as profitable as possible.
The great rhetorical question that they used against the Affordable Care Act, well, we know was Obamacare, was that, do you want the government getting in between you and your doctor? Of course, this is being asked to people, to patients. When in fact, as long as HMOs have been in place, that's been their principal occupation, is getting in between, as you mentioned, in between doctors and patients.
Yeah, psychologists call that a projection.
The word projection, absolutely. Yeah, you take what's wrong, you take what you're doing wrong and saying they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
So the system we have now is exactly that. What we have today is a system where lobbyists and insurance company CEOs and insurance company bureaucrats get in between you and your doctor already. We need a different system.
Quick shout out to Henry Pietris in the audience, because Henry's the one that taught me what the word projection means. So thank you. So when you say it and I know what it is, and it's in great part due to Henry. So continue on about Middletown and how we can take what you've accomplished in Middletown and expand it statewide.
Well, part of the reason Middletown's successful is that we count on everybody to be a part of making us successful. I don't have all the answers, but I'm really good at finding people who do. And I'm really good at figuring out who to bring in and how to pull everybody's ideas together. And that's really the secret of leadership. It's not
community.
It's about taking everybody's abilities and bringing them together collectively. And that's what makes you successful, because nobody's got all the answers by themselves. And if you are capable of getting everyone to the table and getting everyone to give a little something, then you're going to be stronger than ever. And that's why Middletown's in the place it's in today, because we're really good at getting everyone to the table and getting everyone's collaboration. And that's what Connecticut needs right now. We need to be sure that people have a stake in what's going on and that people see a reason to get involved and a reason to give of themselves to make sure that this is doing better. Listen, Connecticut is in a position where it can be doing extraordinary things. We just have to get people involved, and we have to recognize that we've been doing it backwards for a long time and that we need to move in a different direction. And I don't mean just from a policy standpoint, I mean in terms of mindset. Mm-hmm. We have to recognize that this socialization of corporate profit and subsidies for the elites and leaving everyone else on their own doesn't work. And we have to move past these rhetorical and mental crutches that we've been using for so long to justify a set of policies that don't work, and instead recognize that we have to look out for and help one another.
On energy issues, because energy is an important part of Connecticut. We have a great manufacturer in Stratford, Sikorsky, who is, let's say they've had a few years experience building rotors for helicopters, and might be able to take that experience and build wind turbines using that same model. What has Middletown done in terms of the different alternative energies, solar, wind, ones that could be pretty active here in Connecticut?
We've done a lot with solar. We've done nothing with wind yet. We've solarized a number of public buildings, including our business incubator building. It's a couple of blocks long. It's a former factory from the 19th century. It's got a brand new roof and solar panels all over it. We solarized our water, or in the process of solarizing our water treatment facility right now. But in addition, it's not just good environmental policy is good economic policy, and it's not just about energy. You got to kind of factor all of it together. So we created an organic local farm. We have a forest management program to make sure the forested tracts of land we have are healthier. We have preserved lots of acres, hundreds, if not thousands of acres of open space. We committed to alternative energy and energy savings programs in conjunction with the electric utility, Eversource. We banned fracking waste. We banned the use of toxic pesticides on our athletic fields. So we've been a leader in the environment. I joined the climate mayors group before President Trump pulled us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think we have to recognize that being good to the environment is important for our health. It's a moral issue, and it's good economics.
Truly is a moral issue. What can Connecticut do to accomplish some of the things that are being frowned upon, at the very least, frowned upon on the federal level now? What can Connecticut do in and of its own abilities to move forward on these issues?
I think Connecticut can expand the availability of virtual net metering. So what that means is that you're allowed to generate energy through an alternative source in one place and draw it, you put it into the grid, and you draw an equivalent amount of energy off of the grid, and you can credit the electricity you're drawing in to the development source somewhere else. We can do that in Connecticut right now, but it's very limited. So expanding the availability or just removing the caps entirely would create an alternative energy industry that could be very robust and ensure that people, families, businesses can buy electricity that's clean, that's renewable, and much less expensive than what they have now.
Excellent. It's a lot to digest, but it has a lot of thought went into that process. Again, back to Middletown. More things you've accomplished in Middletown.
Well, we have a great school system. We have a police department that's working very, very well. We have added more people to the fire department, but we've also reformed the way a lot of city government works. So when I took office, our Board of Ed and our city were suing each other multiple times over. We had lawsuits all over the place from outside the city, and we were spending millions of dollars a year on legal fees. We actually reformed the way the legal department works. We hired a few attorneys in-house. We put HR into the law office, and we changed all our policies around. So now...
HR, Human Resources?
Yes.
Okay.
We put them under our legal office,
okay,
which worked really well because now everything that we do is being done in conjunction with our attorneys. So now we don't spend anywhere near as much money on outside counsel. We've saved literally millions of dollars a year, and we're getting sued less than ever before. We're getting grieved less than ever before, and we win most of the time when we are sued or grieved. Not 100%, but we are light years ahead of where we were, and we are doing very, very well. Millions of dollars a year saved.
That's a tremendous amount of money that you could put into other worthy objectives.
Exactly.
Again, back to Federal Express coming into town. What other companies have come into town? What are small businesses you can give a shout out to?
Wynn Wholesale set up another Eastern distribution center in Middletown, right down the street from where FedEx is. We got them to come here in, I think it was 2012 or 2013. They broke ground in 2013 or 2014. Excuse me. They opened their doors and dedicated the building in 2013 or 2014. Hundreds of thousands in tax revenue, 300 jobs, 250 jobs. We've had a lot of stories like that, and hundreds of small businesses opening. Restaurants, small retail, consultancies, all kinds of stuff all throughout the community. And it's a very vibrant, economically thriving place. It stands in stark contrast to a lot of what you hear about the state and a lot of what you hear about other communities. Middletown is just healthy and vibrant and doing very well right now.
What part does Wesleyan University play in the grand scheme of things in Middletown?
Wesleyan's important. It's a big factor in our downtown. It brings in a lot of people, and it's we have worked really hard with Wesleyan to leverage their presence. I'm not sure that their presence has always been leveraged or brought into the downtown properly, and we've worked to develop a good relationship with the university, and they're a key part of us being successful. We work very closely with them on it intentionally.
I think some of the folks in the audience are probably looking for bullet points, and we really haven't heard necessarily any bullet points from you. Any eye-catching, snappy, ear-grabbing bullet points, but at the same time, you've been very thorough in how things work together, how you can make things work together, and how to bring everybody in, make it include the whole town and the whole neighborhood, and presumably at some point the whole state, be inclusive in terms of problem solving for not just Middletown, but for the state of Connecticut and ultimately for the United States of America. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Looking forward to having you back. And this has been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. Dan Drew, currently the mayor of Middletown, candidate for governor of the state of Connecticut. And may I add, the great state of Connecticut. Thanks for joining us.